Hi, Sebastian. Happy New Year, man.
Hi, Tim. Happy New Year to you too. How are you?
Good, good. Just let you know that the everything's recording.
Yeah.
So where are you out of, Sebastian?
Sorry, could you repeat once again, Tim?
Where are you located?
I'm from Bangalore, India.
Bangalore.
Yeah,
So this is
yeah.
this is late for you. This is what? 1
Yes,
o'clock?
yes. It's 9:30 night.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't
but
know
yeah,
how
it's
you
good
guys
that
do that.
after so many days we are starting the meeting.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
All right, we're gonna wait for people to come on board here. We'll give everyone a couple of minutes.
Okay, sure.
Hi, guys. So we're waiting for people to come in. We're going to give everyone a couple minutes here. The agenda is on the screen, so you should be able to see what topics are on board for this meeting. We'll give everyone about 2 more minutes here. Okay, so let's get started. Um, so this is the ORAN integration FPO meeting for January 3rd. What you see before you is the agenda. What we want to do is quickly approve some of the meeting notes from last meeting, December 13th, which is our last meeting. we'll have a discussion on Release 3.0, specifically about a particular user story that as we went in through this user story for trying to orchestrate a network function using the SMO, there was uh, some constraints that we're working with. And so the question is that how do we go about, do we uh, do this in Release 3? And if so, how do we go about doing it? So we'll have a discussion with that. Then what I want to do is kind of orient us to some of the work that we have to do in January, which is these SIG2 artifacts to complete these use cases. So we'll have a discussion on that, and then finally we'll come into agreements with the user stories that are out there. See if anyone has any objections to the user stories that look like they're complete. Is there any other agenda items for would people want to discuss today? Okay, I don't see any hands raised, nothing in the chat. So I'm going to go in and go back to December 13th, which was our last meeting, and ask, these are the minutes. Does anyone have any concerns or edits? You know, by the way, you guys can edit stuff if needed. Right? This isn't just me. So if you have some edits or anything on the notes, let me know. If not, I would ask, is there anyone that objects to approving these minutes? Okay. Again, I don't see any hands, so I'll assume that they're approved. All right. And so the next item up for discussion is really talking about this use case that we have for actually deploying a network function using an SMO. And this is led by Seishu and Ravi, and I think there were some discussions that were happening in creation of this. And so I'm going to hand this off to, I don't see Seishu, so Ravi, can I hand this off to you for you to start sharing and having this discussion? At the end result of this, guys, we're going to spend about 10 or 15 minutes, but what I'd like to do is for us to come to a conclusion of how we want to approach this so that Ravi and Seishu can make progress. And one of those approaches might be, we're not going to do this for Release 3, and their work is easy after that, right? We put this as a Release 4 roadmap item. But if we want to do it in Release 3, what do we want to try to accomplish? So, Ravi, could I leave that with you for 10 minutes?
Oh, yeah, sure. I was hoping Sheshu would also be on the call. I don't see, but yeah, I'll speak for him as much as I can. Yeah, so
do you want to share or shall?
Yes, I'll share my screen.
All right, I'm going to stop.
Yeah. Do you see my screen right now?
We do. Go ahead.
I think there was this, not this one. There's like, so 1 minute. Yeah, I think, yeah, so I think, yeah, we could use this to kind of come up to speed with where this use case is and sync up and take the group's feedback on how do we proceed with this. So yeah, there are many comments since over the vacation period since the last call, and a lot of the discussions have been happening on this document itself. And this is what I tried to summarize in this couple of slides here. Yeah, and we did try to address many comments, and it's generally in two broad categories. So one of them is kind of alignment with terminologies with the specs, and comments from Joey, you were primarily saying to kind of align it more the KTS profile of in which the network function deployment use case has been discussed instead of the working group 6 level use case specification. The current yeah, so right now the description, I mean, I think this was based on, when I kind of documented it, I was falling back on the slides that the group had kind of had a reference for this use case, which was which was pointing to the one that we could. That was basically trying to say that okay, this is the use case that we want to use, and that's how the document kind of evolved. So right now the use case is at the level at the granularity of deploying a network function, while the KTS profile specification is at the granularity of instantiating network function deployment. Yeah, it seems to be like, I didn't realize this. For me, when I was looking at it, I thought it was when you say network function deployment, it meant entire network function itself. Not again, I myself, I have a little bit. I'm not completely clear about it, whether when the term network function deployment is being used as a as a subcomponent or a noun here, or is it network function deployment as a verb itself? So, but anyway, so this is I think a lot of the comments were around. Do we kind of lean it towards network function deployment? My understanding is that when you talk about network function, the implementation typically exists as multiple modular microservices, and each one of them becomes network function deployment. And typically, most of them exist in the same cluster. You could a single network function, for example, a CUP, you could take the routing and switching functions, the user plane as one, the control plane as another realization, the management aspect as or some other kind of supporting database, some other functions. So they all are basically realized as, it can be packaged into one, say Helm chart, and then you could deploy it, but realization would be that they exist as multiple pods and multiple microservices and so on. So that is my understanding. But I think the way we could address this, if we want to just align it with what the specification has from the creators profile, because this is the use case that we want to realize, we could, I could kind of rewrite the document and just align it in that from that perspective. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so Ravi, yeah, so I think some of this we had discussions with already, and we've already just what you have on your last bullet is I think what we kind of come down to the agreement on. So I would ask the group because I do see Sharon and Alok on. I think that's what we want to try to do. I don't see Joey on, but we want to align it to the K8S profile use case description. So we've got a network function deployment. Your network function versus network function deployment is actually correct, right? So again, you can break down a network function to various deployments. So what we have in reality, if you look at all the NFs that we're deploying right now, they're all just one-to-one, right? An instance is a deployment, right? So we may very well still do that in release 3. I don't have a problem, but I think on the use case, we want to make sure that when we come down to the IMS, we're talking about deployments from that point. From the SMO, within the SMO, how it figures out where to put what deployments. You can have the use case take into that consideration, right? But when you get down into the certainly when you get down to the IMS side, it's got to be a function deployment. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So when you say that, when you come down to the IMS, or are you talking about the DMS?
I'm sorry, did I say IMS? DMS.
Okay,
My
okay.
bad. When you come to the cloud.
Oh, yeah. Yes. No, I was always, because I thought somewhere in your comments you were talking about network function topology and all. So I was thinking that your perception is that network function can actually be kind of deconstructed and kind of provisioned in different clusters. But I don't. When from my perspective, when it's a network function, and when in network function deployment, they are all targeted to the same cloud and one particular cluster there. So though they are realized, as I said, as different modular
Yeah, and
kind of
that's what
microservices.
currently, like if you look at the open source ones, OAI, 35GC, they're all one-to-one, right? But I'm just saying that there are implementations that actually have these more complex network functions. The question is that what do we want to do for release 3? And again, if we just use network function deployment when we address the cloud side, and then have the SMO address the network function side, how it parcels that out, that's fine. And for your use case, what we said was we could have an assumption there for one because that's what the current ones are. Alok, your hand is up now.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I agree on the terminology alignment with the ORAN spec, right? So, and I think that was also one of our, it's actually two comments which Joey had like written it down in the user story, right? So what we are aligning is that we call it the NF deployments, right? And then I didn't follow the instantiation term to be used explicitly. Do we agree on that aspects as well, or is it something implicit with the user story itself that it is talking about the instantiation only and not the other possible lifecycle operations?
Yeah, I think once you kind of, it's if you for me deployment was synonymous to instantiate, but then when you have a special meaning to network function deployment, I think it's better to call it network function or a network function instantiation using SMO. Yeah, I mean
I would say
yeah.
then let's call it instantiation, because NF deployment itself is a term, right? So it could be easily confused with that term as deployment, which here we are using for the instantiation operation.
Yeah, so what I would suggest is, because I'm trying to move this through a lot, so could you make a comment on that and onto the use case itself, and that way because I think we're talking about terminologies. I'm not.
I think it already exists. Joey
Okay.
covered, and
Okay.
I
All
just
right.
reiterated.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. So then we'll make those things. But Ravi, what is it that you wanted? What is it that you guys wanted to do? Because you said that you wanted to try to show certain things within that constraint of that we just discussed in the previous slide. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think that these are easy. This is what I was trying to comment. My comment pretty much tried to summarize. Like, okay, these are easy to think, and these are easy to address because it's primarily about alignment with what exists. The literature exists, and you have the specs and so on. But I think these set of comments, I think, are the most kind of ones that we need more discussion, where Seishu's input should have been more relevant. So, because I think a lot of these use cases, whether we are talking about the cloud registration, the cluster creation, deletion, I think they are coming from some kind of an implementations point of view which exists today. And when we're talking to Seishu, what I understand is that there's no kind of meaningful implementation of an NFO, SMO NFO within OSC. And I think a lot of these other comments were basically trying to kind of trying to align, this particular the use case flows and the steps with exactly what exists with an implementation. Let's align with that. In the sense, like how are these specifications getting kind of being realized within the OSC, and what is the granularity of deployment, or if there are steps that the implementation is considering from reconfiguring the cluster if those network function requirements are not met, or how is the ASD being realized in the implementation, and so on. So I think, yeah, so this is basically, to summarize, is what it is, what I've commented here. There seems to be something within the OEM project, but I don't think there's something that we can use when we can call as an NFO, and we can use it. And this is again, I've not personally looked into what is in the OSC documentation, the repository, and so on. But this is again, I'm just summarizing what Seishu told me. There was a thing on FOCOM also. That's what he mentioned. I think there was some mention. There are some comments on FOCOM inventory and as such. So realization of whether inventory management or cluster management aspects are not. I don't think they exist too. So the question, I think, to this group is, do we have other reference implementations so that we could use that to kind of align this use case, or do we kind of develop this natively within the SIG automation group, and basically then take some of the implementation that is coming from the other use cases and tie it up. Because I have my opinion, this is again what I had commented on Slack, saying that if you want some realization of NFO, I think we have to demonstrate that interaction between NFO and the FOCOM to get the status of the cluster, or I think there's also comment on the DMS state, and then kind of go ahead with the provisioning of the network function. So I think this is, so these are, I think this is a more crucial slide, and see, how we, what is the next steps in relation to that. I mean, I said I could rework on this, the use case itself, and align it with this. That should not be an issue. But I think this is a more important set of questions.
All right, so to the group. So this is really what we were hoping. We're 10 minutes over, so I'm going to give us about 10 more minutes on this, because this is the important thing, right? So as Robbie said, is that when we went back and we looked at what OSC has, because again, OSC is doing this part of the work with their open source, particularly the NFO and the FOCOM work. There isn't anything really in OSC that they have for NFO. It's very minimal implementation of it. So we're going to have to do a lot of work in order to realize this use case, guys. And so that's one point. And if that means a lot of work, means that we need to have contributors to help out with that work, right? Because code is currency in this world that we're in. Okay. So the question I have is, the first question I have from the group is, given the changes that they'll make to the use case to be an NF deployment and stuff like that, do we have members that are going to commit to working on this use case? Can you guys, can I get some show of hands or something that want to work on this particular use case? I'm not seeing any hands. This is not good, guys. So, Sarah?
Well, I mean, I don't think we're in a position to commit to committing at this point, but I think we're interested in this use case, and we're interested in supporting its implementation from an Ericsson perspective. I think in terms of what's there in OSC, I'm not entirely sure that I understand where you're drawing the boundaries from what you would reuse from OSC to what you would use in the execution of this use case in order to and how much of an end-to-end use case we want to demonstrate versus how much of the specific capabilities of Nefio as a participant in the contract we're expecting to see here.
Well, I think some of this is the mapping of that reference implementation, right? So again, the work would be done with under the OSC work. They got an NFO. They have they'd have the integration with the and utilize the Nefio enablers, right? And some of these questions, I think, are really further design questions that we can work out, whether you do a KRM, CR-based ASD. But the first question I would ask is, that says, do we have members that actually want to work, knowing that the NFO is not there? It's all going to be, pretty much greenfield type of stuff. Do we have members that are want to work on this particular use case, right? Knowing that we've got work that we're going to have to do in the OSC work, right? And that's what I'm looking for, because if there's no members, we can complete a design if we want to, but we can't do any code, right? So I don't know if we can call this for release 3. Am I making myself clear, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I think getting the use case complete to a level of industrialization is probably a bit far-fetched for release 3. Getting some aspects of it implemented as a proof of concept for release 3 might be more realistic.
Well, our objective was a proof of concept, right? So that is a proof of concept. I'm not trying to make an industrial piece of this, right? But it will require people to work on the NFO, and so that's what I was looking at. Because even if we don't,
when you talk about working on the NFO, if you look at the diagram that we've been talking around, and I haven't been involved in the more recent conversations in this group per se, and so maybe I'm talking out of turn here, but how much of the NFO do you expect to be coming from Nefio versus how much of it do you expect to be coming from other parts of the the OSC community?
I don't know. I think Nepio has got their enabler, right? And then the enablers hook up into the NFO. But that's the NFO will use the enablers. I don't know how much. Again, I don't know how much is there. You know, for what I understand, there's very little. So you got the NFO interaction with the SO and other stuff that may very well have to work out of the OSC piece in order to use the enablers. Robbie, correct me if I'm wrong, or I think Sagar, you also had a conversation with.
Yeah, right. I mean, yeah, the starting point would be, I mean, I think the key intelligence here is, you know, how do you onboard something like, I mean, right now what we do is we onboard like a network function package, but I don't think there is any dependency there, any KRMs related dependencies that say, hey, these are the requirements from a cluster perspective or from the infra perspective. I think that's the main missing component from an ASD. So I think, so once you're provisioning the network function, and that is the kind of those artifacts that needs to be validated against the FOCOM. And then I think the remaining pieces exist. Do we do some kind of a GitOps here? It's not a direct interaction with the API server itself. But I think you could. I mean, it's probably, I think, still valid. It's still valid the way we do right now. So I think that this piece, I think, is a more critical piece, which doesn't exist today from an NFO perspective. I mean, I think that's what we need to kind of focus on, and how do you kind of interact with the FOCOM.
So you're saying the packaging, your belief is up in from what conversation you had with Seishu, is that the big steps that you have to be concerned about that we will have to add on is have an ASD that's a KRM based ASD, and have appropriate interactions with FOCOM. Is that accurate in order to help with the homing? Is that right?
I think so. I mean, this similar kind of activity is going on the NF2 to infra. I think NF2 infra, but that particular activity work item too. So I'm not sure what is coming out of that, but it'll be similar to that. Yeah.
All right. So let me see if we can do a chip instead of a drive here. So, okay. So it sounds like we have this opportunity that we don't know if there's enough of the NFO or what the work expected would be to do this in release 3. But we do, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, I'm just trying to read the room, right? But we do have enough interest to at least progress this the next step forward into a more detailed design of how the enablers would be used, the Nepio enablers would be used in the NFO. Is that accurate? Did I get that correct, Karen?
Certainly from my perspective, yes, I think we do.
Okay. Does anyone have a different perspective than that? Okay. So we are kind of required for this month, right? January, a little February, it's a little slop going on here. But for the next month, we're kind of going to be working on this anyway towards the piece. So, Ravi, is there any reason why we can't take this to the next level? Approve this use case with the conditionally approve this use case and say we're going to take this to the next level and determine if the work is going to be if we can get it done in a release 3 timeframe.
Yeah, sure. As I said, yeah, no, the use case documentation and the next steps towards coming up with the high level system design, I think we can take it to that level for sure. Yeah, I think that should be fine.
All right. Now the question I have is, because this is going to take a bit of work, right? So the next question does anyone object to that? I got ahead of myself. All right. So my next question will be for this next piece of it, right? For this next piece of it, do we have what I would ask is that Robbie, Could you, are you willing to lead this next step of this design step that we got the SIG2 artifact?
Yeah, sure. I could, as I said, the alignment with the spec, but when it comes to the other, the kind of the reusing NIFU enablers and what additional functionality we want in the platform today, I think, of course, I'll probably, we'll need to do it as a probably in consultation with probably Seshu and Sagar and Joseph and all these folks too.
So that
I think should be fine. Yeah, I think we could bring, but we don't have. What I'm saying is that we wouldn't be able to map it to something that exists, that's tangible.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's my only concern. But I think we could take it to the point saying that okay, these are the artifacts, the new things that's required, and identify those requirements, and then decide, whether we could realize it in release 3 or not.
All right. So what I'm going to ask the group is, so Ravi, so what I would ask then is that people, for the group, people that are interested in working on the next step of this use case with Ravi, right? If you could message him to let him know, so that he'll make sure that you're included in that design work, guys. Okay? Is that, anyone have a problem with that? All right. All right. So I'm going to leave with that, right? So I took that as we're going to take this to the next step, and then we'll figure out if we've got the people to do that. So, which leads us into the next steps, guys. So let me get my participants down again. Chat. All right. Which leads us into our next step is our artifacts themselves, that if you look at our use cases, the use cases kind of were, saying what we wanted to try to do. And now we're down to this point where we've got to go build some stuff that add on to these use cases with these particular other components, right? We got to go develop a component architecture with this. We've got to have the operators identified. We've got to have the CRDs themselves, the API design in there, right? And then we got to have some, how we're going to do some testing. And that's what we're going to try to do through January for each of these 5 use cases. Okay. A lot of these things right now, Alexis, I think you're on, are you not? Yes, you are.
Yeah, I'm here.
Have they come up with any, for these particular pieces, have they come up with any example artifacts of what they're looking for?
No, not yet. That's not done. My goal is to be the one building this example for the user story I have. So these would be the example, but we don't have any yet.
Okay, so does that mean that the groups are free to? Is there something that you want? Are these other use cases free to use these examples or to build their own versions of these?
Yeah, at this point in time, it's we're playing a bit of a catch up in SIG1 to try to get ready for R3, right? So these are new things that we're putting in place, so we're more organized.
Okay.
Given the baseline is nothing today, anyone that come up with something is a good candidate to be a base for others to look at, right? So, so you don't wait for something to come up from someone. I will definitely come up with something myself for the user stories that I'm owning, in probably the next, hopefully by the end of this week. But anyone can come up with what they believe is good, and we will start working based on what people will come up with for the R3 planning. And that process is definitely going to be better in R4 because we'll have the whole, R3 to some extent timeline to build these things. But right now we're playing a bit of a catch up. So that's why it's not as mature of a process as I'm hoping it to be.
Okay. All right. And what I'll do is I'm just going to show these guys what Sagar started with for release 2. There was a deployment blueprint that they have, so you can use that when you talk about your component architectures. And then they also talk about what operators are available, right? So you could use these two things potentially for your work in those two artifacts. And then the other point is under SIG 5, service assurance. They've got this they've got a set of user stories where they are actually going into the I'm looking for it, where they actually had the interaction diagram. I saw them. They're there somewhere. Maybe it's here. Nope. They got them somewhere. No. Subash, you're on? No, Subash left. So, Joseph, do you know where they the service assurance guys? I saw some interaction diagrams that they were using with the network architecture team or network automation team that talks about the what they were trying to do for telemetry and stuff like that for service assurance.
No, not sure where it is stored.
All right, I'm going to go find the interaction diagram. So, but my point is,
Tim, maybe I can put it on the chat here. I think, I don't know if that's what you're referring to, but that's definitely in line with some of the things we could be looking into.
No, he had the interact. Oh, okay, yeah. So this is the other piece. No, this is they're doing interaction diagrams. So that's what I was going to do. I'll take an action item to get the interaction diagrams or some of the artifacts, what the artifacts the service assurance team is using. Okay, and I'll let the team know where they're at. Okay. So that's where we're at on these pieces of it. So guys, if you look at these user stories, we have the other 5 user stories here: create and delete the clusters. We have the OCloud registration, which is led by Alexis, and then we have the deploy the near real-time RIC and the reconfiguration of the ORAN capacity that's been led by Seger. So my question to the team is first is is there any objections for us to take these use cases, just like what we talked about for the NF orchestration, to the next level and do the design work on this in January? I don't see any objections, right? So guys, Alok, thank you.
Yeah.
It was like you guys were too quiet, so I just pointed out like, I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think if I recall correctly, the first 3 user stories, which are more infrastructure related, we kind of agreed on taking a next step and doing like more sort of a design activities around those user stories, right?
Right.
I'm not sure about the last 2 because that has a bit of a gray zone with the O1 interface, which we haven't talked at all so far. So,
Well,
so I'm
what we
not.
said is that all those O1 is out of, correct me if I'm wrong, Seger, these are yours, but if I understand it correctly, the O1 is out of scope for this release. Right?
Yes. For R2, for R3, I mean, we said that O1 is not there yet.
So they're not going to do O1 for this release, right?
I mean, unless we for magically we have some bandwidth and we have time at the end of the day, let's say, then we can think about it, but that's not something we will prioritize. Also, when I mentioned this in the reconfiguration ORAN NF deployment document, the last user story, I mentioned there that O1, things can be changed using O1 also. I just mentioned that so that we cover it for R4, but that's something which will be decided if we will have the bandwidth or not.
So what's the concern, Alok?
No, it's like, okay, so if I understood it correctly, so if it is only about O2 for the deployment of the near direct and the XApps, because I mean, we don't differentiate between, to me, it sounds like it's just another NF deployment type of a use case that we are addressing, if it is only O2 that we are after in that user story. So
No, I
it's
think
hard for me to.
there's a couple more.
Yeah.
We're not hooking up O1. So they're going to hook up E2. They're going to hook up well, they can't hook up A1 because the SMO is not there yet. But they're going to hook up E2. They'll hook up, correct me if I'm wrong, Sager, right? They'll hook up all the 3GPP-Fs and everything else, right? So, and then that's the first one. That's the first user story. So it gets the near real-time RIC. If you look at today in release 2, there is no real-time RIC or XApp that's been deployed. So they're going to deploy that and hook that up, right? They're also going to then there's a process of doing a reconfiguration of some capacity that they showed in the 3.5 DC piece of it. They're going to show that again, right? But they're not using the SMO to affect these things. We're just getting all the operators, the associated operators, the associated CRs, the deployment packages, all set up basically. So it's a setup type of thing. And the only thing and with the interfaces that are applicable right now. Does that answer your question a lot?
Let me go through the user stories because maybe it itself answers the questions which you do partially answer, but yeah, I still have some more clarity needed. Like, what are the deltas and what exactly are we proposing with the deployment of the near RTRIC and the XApp?
So do you want to hold their work for the next step until you do that, or what are you suggesting, Ella? Because the question I'm asking is, can these guys go to the next step?
Yeah, and that's exactly was my first comment. Like, didn't we said that we can hold the last two user stories for now and can focus on the first three, which is more clear and which is more infrastructure centric, and we have at least a fair bit of understanding like how to proceed on those. But maybe Anders has some additional comments on that. He has a raised hand.
Was thinking here, what are we actually say? It's maybe a process question. What are we really approving, or what are we really saying when you say we move them forward? Because
we're moving them forward.
Quite a few people with outstanding comments on them, I think.
Yeah, so we're moving them forward from where they're at, and they'll now develop the SIG2 artifacts. That fundamentally, that's what's missing. So what this does is that gives all the information the SIG2 team will need to know if there's some modifications to work to the NEPIO enablers that are there. It also gives the design team to know what work they have to do, right? You know, what needs to be modified, right? So these are the design artifacts that they currently identify that needs to be done. That's what we're asking for, the work that we wanted to do in January, to take these use cases and say, okay, now let's start doing the design work on these particular user stories. If that answered the question.
Are we continuing to evolve the user stories in parallel, or are we now freezing them?
There's never have anything frozen, right? But they're
they're
semi-thaw, they're semi-frozen, right? Because they're like, okay, this is what the intention of those user stories is what we will try to accomplish, right, with these other artifacts. So you might have to change some steps or two or something like that. But the intention, the goal of those user stories remains the same. And so, Robbie, go ahead, finish, Andrew.
Yeah, please go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was hesitating, so maybe you can clarify. I'm trying to evaluate if we're just looking for the intention of these use cases, or if we are.
Well, so let's just take one, right? Let's take the first one, right? The feature overview, there's a goal of this, right? So the goal of this use case is to do this, right? Is to realize the near real-time RIC and the XApp, right? And they want to do that by deploying it into the framework, right? And so this piece of it, we're not going to change. We're going to try to make that goal. Now, there might be some additional some additional steps, or the steps themselves that you're dealing with may need to be modified based upon the design considerations, how it's structured and stuff like that. But the goal of saying, I want to deploy, like we've done for the CU, the DUs in release 2, we're going to deploy the non-real-time RIC and the XApps from OSC's flavor of those into an OCloud, right? Using the Nepio enablers. That won't change. What will change would be what may change will be, some of the exact steps that may take place.
Because I think we had similar discussions also on the OCloud reference for the use cases in the first two. If we should be using the Kubernetes profile instead of the old one that's there now. But I guess those details we can still feather out. The goal is still to create a cluster.
Yeah, it's to create the cluster, right? And delete a cluster and register an OCloud, right? Those are the goals on those first three. So,
and then
Robbie,
we can continue to discuss how.
Yeah. So this one is the goal is to get the real-time, non-real-time RIC down into the OCloud, right? Using the Nepio enablers. But we're not going to do that with an SMO. And then the other one is just like what they did with free 5GC, they did a reconfiguration of the capacity using that. So we're just showing that as well. So that's the goals. How they go about do that can change on those use cases. Robbie, did you have something to comment on that?
Yeah, no, my comment was primarily, it's basically coming to what even it was a comment related to what I made the last call as well. Though there is no kind of a tangible alignment to the use cases in working group 6 or ORAN in general right now, because we don't kind of cite those references. But I think this is more complementary in the sense it brings all that ORAN kind of new functionalities into Nepio and at least builds that kind of the basic framework within Nepio to orchestrate them from a Nepio perspective, right?
From a Nepio perspective, that's right. That's the
exactly. Though we don't do an O2 specific or an O1 or E2 specific things. I'm not sure the next use case deployment capacity. Once you have the XApp, you could bring in some kind of an E2 kind of a use case there too. But I think it's a very useful work. I think we should continue with it from my perspective.
Okay. I think Alok, you had your hand raised, and then Darren.
Yeah. So when you were scrolling through the user story itself, so the very first condition says like it has to be ORAN compliant, and I was just scrolling through the use case specification in ORAN, and we do have one use case there talking about the deployment of the XApps in the near RTRIC, right? And it shows the O2 interactions between the NFO and the DMS. And here in this user story, we are talking about without SMO. So how are we going to align between the ORAN?
This is without an SMO for sure. So make the comments on the user stories, and they should make the adjustments.
But what? Okay, yeah, maybe I can comment on, or if you have, Ravi,
Yeah, and a quick comment. I think when you say SMO, it doesn't involve an NFO right here. So I mean, whatever implementation you might say is part of user 3, NFO will not be handling this particular kind of deployment of the SIG platform or the XApp. That's what it means. The SMO is synonymous with any interaction between NFO and FOCOM. So it'll be very similar to how in R2 the other vRAN network functions are being deployed purely from a NFO perspective. I think that the kind of the decision was that, okay, we do this base aspects here, and then the next release tie things up as the other functions NFO FOCOM matures within the implementation.
that was the goal, guys. So we're crawling, right? So we get them down. We're showing how they can use the NFO enabler, but it's not hooked up through the end-to-end SMO NFO stuff, right?
So
That'll have to be a future release.
Yeah. So this functionality, as you said, Ravi, is already being supported, and that was my impression as well in the R2 release, right?
Oh no,
And-
no. There's no real-time RIC or XApp in release 2.
Yeah, but those are the NFs, and to me, to be honest, I mean, these are just the different applications, right? So you can, from the
It should be
implementation
easy then,
point
right?
of view.
It should be easy then, right?
Yeah, the functionality, I mean, from the O2 perspective, it doesn't differentiate between if it is a near RT-RIC, NF, or
Yeah, but it does during a NFO because I got to go build the topologies. I've got to go do this stuff. So all the deployment stuff, the interfaces, the NADs have to be there. That everything has to be taken care of when you do that on this. And we have to show the SIG architecture because they might have to make modifications. So there's a design that has to work to get a network function down here, right? It may very well use the same APIs on the O2 a lot, but there's got to be work that has to be done for it to get it down.
Yeah. So same as R2, with that architecture in mind, we wanted to have this user story to support NFO for deployment of the near RT-RIC and the XApps.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
And Sagar, you're on. So correct me if I'm wrong if that was not the scope, but that was the scope that I had.
Yeah, it's correct.
Okay. So Sarah, your hand is raised.
Probably the same point as Alok was making. So to be 100% clear, what this is broadening the scope of the network functions that NFO can deploy rather than specifically providing support for SMO or ORAN compliant APIs within NFO.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, at this point on this particular story, that's right. That gets into the difference between SMO with or without the SMO, right? Okay, so my question is back to the group again, is can Sagar take his team and progress to does anyone object to doing that for the next design activity? Okay.
I had one question on the reconfigure ORAN enough deployment capacity.
Sure.
And this may just be because I come from a product development environment where we're quite strict on what kind of functionality we introduce and how we maintain it. Is there a risk in this, since we don't propose to use O1 for this functionality, that we introduce something that builds a legacy that we don't want to support it going forward? That we need to stay backwards compatible with, or what is our view on introducing something like that?
Sagar, can you help with what we're trying to do and to answer that question?
Yeah, so the thing is, okay. See, if we want to do things with O1, that's not a problem from day one, But the thing is, the thing is that the way we started these user stories, we want to take it in phases, because just by doing O1, it's not a problem from the NF perspective, because in the NF it's implemented. In the NF it's implemented, NF it's all good. But then we also have to think about that if the SMO is ready, where is the SMO? What and how SMO will do it. So that is also the blocking point, it's not only the NF. So
yes,
if we will force it to do it from the NF perspective, then the other user stories will also be a little bit modified, saying that we need an SMO in which the O1 is also there and everything is there. So from the NF perspective, it's fine. Then we have to think from the SMO perspective.
So
So
in this case, the OAM, the SMO can't support this at that point. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, yeah. I mean, what I'm saying that OAI NF can support O1. The question is whether can the SMO support right now or not? Do we have the SMO which we will have, let's say, because we don't have anything right now, right?
Yeah, the OSC SMO OAM. That's what I was very
Yeah,
specific
OEMs.
about.
If OEM supports this right now, or if it will support during R3, then I think let's just go for it.
Okay, so let's go ahead. Someone's gonna say
Yeah,
something?
my gut feeling when I read it, and this may be because I'm used to being strict about backwards compatibility, is that this is something that looked like we were trying to introduce too early before we had the O1 functionality in place. And since we don't have full support for the O1 interface, we introduce another way of implementing the same use case. Which then drags out to efficiency in the end. Look, you had a...
Yeah, it's again back to the very first comment on these two user stories, right? So we know that the R3 is not targeting the O1 interface, right? And if it is the O1 as the user story itself says, like with and without O1 interface implementation, then I'm a bit confused now. Like what is the...
I interpret it as a workaround for not having O1 fully.
Yeah, that's what it was. So in release 3, it's a
Yes.
workaround for not having O1. Correct me if I'm wrong, Segar.
So
Yes, that's what we said that, and we will take it in phases, and we do it in R401, or unless we in the end of the R3, if we have time and we can do it, we will do it. And that was how the user stories were designed in December.
So maybe Sagar, if we can capture it explicitly in the
It is.
overview section itself.
Oh, yeah, disclaimer, yeah.
Okay, disclaimer. Huh. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's a disclaimer.
Okay.
I mean,
from a rationale point of view.
Document, yeah. Sorry, Adrian?
From a rationale point of view, is there a consequence of not doing this until R4? Are we going to suffer anything?
I don't think so. I don't think it suffers anything. Correct me if I'm wrong, Segar. What we were doing is we were trying to show the features that are in release 2.
3.
No,
okay.
Let me finish. We're
Okay,
trying to show
okay.
features that were in release 2 for that they've done for pre-5DC core, right? So we're just taking that feature of changing capacity or configuring the NF in the RAN for release 3. So that was the intention, right? We see it in the core. They can reconfigure the bandwidth like in the core, right? That was one of the big things that they did for release 2. We now extend that to release 3, right? For the RAN. That's what we were trying to show with this little chip shot.
Okay, and this is also without the SMO interaction.
Yeah, there's no SMO in
there. And has that been captured?
And it also shows, well, there's no O1. The O1 is the SMO interaction. It also shows the configuration as data, right? So that I believe that's what that shows, that principle. So the question is to the group, and it's a good question, Anders, that you're asking. It says, does this give us any value that we want to actually show in release 3, given these disclaimers that are there?
I had that for the last 2 actually, but I haven't written.
Yeah.
Oh, I can tell you, we want to finish and show that NF down there because it's going to have all that deployment. You're going to want to see the deployment. You're going to see the new interfaces, the new NADs. You don't want to worry about all that when you have to attach it into an SMO, right? You want that stuff already there. So I don't have a problem with the 4th one. The 5th one was it shows feature compatibility with 4.
With 4. Did I
with,
hear
with the pre-5GC core in it.
Okay.
Sorry, that's right. So So let's do this. Let's split this. Can we take the deploy the near real-time brick XApp and go to the next step of the deployment for that? Does anyone have any objections to that? Okay. Now the NF capacity one, Sagar and team, do you want to try to do this? Do we want to advertise trying to do this? Sagar?
I mean, I have no problem in not doing it, let's say.
Okay, that's I should have said it that way, right?
I would like to do it and just get it started, with or without O1, whatever, and then we do it next.
Okay, so let me ask you the question, and I think it's a fair question that Anders probably would ask, is why do you want to do that? What benefit is that going to bring?
I mean,
maybe if I rephrase, what benefit does it bring to do something in R3 if we anyway want to do O1 in R4? As you described in the you described the full use case in the user story as well.
Yeah.
But why do we need to do release and implementation before that? That's my question, really.
okay.
And it can be a value, of course.
Yeah. So to answer that particular thing, the thing is, it's not mandatory that we do it in R3. Okay, because anyways we will not have an O1 properly. But another reason of doing it in R3 would be that we make a base for R4 that okay, in R4 this will be there. And this is not one of the use cases where we will spend a lot of time, because the way I've described how it will be done, it's quite simple. It's not one of the use cases where we're going to have a lot of time invested. So that was the story. So that's why I also kept the priority of this use case quite medium or low, let's say, because it's not something which is going to take a lot of time. But if today we decide that we don't do it in R3 and we move it to R4, I have no problem either, and it's fair enough that we will focus in R4 with proper O1 and with an SMO which supports O1. Okay, that's also fine. So that's
also, if you say it's a small thing in R3, then I guess it's also a small thing in R4.
In R4, then we're gonna show properly with O1, right? So that's then it's gonna be more centric.
Exactly, and it's not really that we do because another scenario and a good reason for doing something over 2 releases is that you need the lead time to implement a large chunk, but that's not what it is, if I hear things correct.
I mean, see, there in that particular case, what will happen that right now, if you see that the use case is very specific, it's only reconfiguration. Whereas if we will use properly with O1, then we will go on the configuration part also.
Yes.
We will use it for configuration and for reconfiguration. But right now, we will not use O1 neither for configuration nor for reconfiguration. And this use case, which was already there, it was something coming from R1, where in R1 we were trying to showcase that how a free 5G SMF can be, if we change the capacity, how it will react. Similarly, we are trying to showcase something similar with the RAN NF, because the RAN NFs were included in R2, but in R2 a reconfiguration use case is not there because we didn't have the bandwidth. So in R3, the idea was to have the small reconfiguration use case, and in R4 to make it proper and use the O1 interface also in the other use cases where we will deploy the NF, and then you use O1 to configure and then to reconfigure.
So Sagar, is there any relationship with a need to kind of based kind of control here for changing the capacity of the network function deployment, reconfiguring it?
Dependency on what? Sorry, with what?
With XApp, you have an XApp. What does that XApp do? Do we have a use case for the XApp? That's my question.
No, we don't. Not at
you
this
don't.
point.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
I mean, tying these cases later. I mean, the XApp versus capacity change.
So that's independent, Ravi. I mean, those are two different use cases. Reconfigure ORAN NF is different than deploy an ERT rig and XR with SMO.
All right, let's do this, guys. So we're at time, right? Sorry about that. So what we're going to do is we'll take this up for next week. But what I'm going to do is say to the team that these 4 are released to the next step. Again, what I expect the group is reach out to Sagar and Alexis if you're going to want to work on the design work for that piece of it to help build those artifacts. These need to be done by the end of this month, end of the January, okay? And then next week we'll talk about specifically what we want to do with this thing here, right? Okay? Make sense, guys?
Yes.
All right, thank you. I appreciate your time. We'll get it. Don't worry about it. All right. Talk to you guys later.
Yeah, thanks, Tim.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.